Hello, welcome to Caleb's Poetry Corner. I'm the aforementioned Caleb. I'm going to use these I don't know, maybe I'll make more, as just a way of kind of talking about poetry, poems that I love. I'm not going to do any real scholarship. I'm not going to consult any scholarship. This is just going to kind of be off the cuff. I made a few notes of things that I want to kind of talk about. So if this is helpful to you, if you want to use this in any way, not that I think anybody ever would, but if you want to, you have my permission. It's cool, whatever. I don't care. Today, for the first edition, we're going to talk about one of my favorite poets, Seamus Heaney. Seamus Heaney, there he is. He is, of course, an Irish poet, Nobel Prize winner, died in 2013. His first volume came out in the late 60s. This poem is going to be from North, which I believe came out in 75. The Grauballe Man. As if he had been poured in tar, he lies on a pillow of turf and seems to weep the black river of himself. The grain of his wrist is like a bog oak, the ball of his heel like a basalt egg. His instep has shrunk cold as a swan's foot or a wet swamp root. His hips are the ridge and purse of a mussel, his spine an eel arrested under a glisten of mud. The head lifts, the chin is a visor raised above the vent of his slashed throat that is tanned and toughened. The cured wound opens inwards to a dark elderberry place. Who will say corpse to his vivid cast? Who will say body to his opaque repose? And his rusted hair, a mat unlikely as a fetus's. I first saw his twisted face in a photograph, a head and shoulder out of the peat, bruised like a forceps baby, but now he lies perfected in my memory, down to the red horn of his nails, hung in the scales with beauty and atrocity, with the dying gall too strictly compassed on his shield, with the actual weight of each hooded victim slashed and dumped, right? Just great poem, great imagery, kind of incredibly arresting detail. So the first kind of part of the poem digs into this image of the Grauballe Man that you can go and look up, right? But fair warning, right? It's a dead body. It's not graphic or anything, right? It's been mummified by peat over thousands of years, but it is a dead body, right? And some of the earliest pictures, the picture where he talks about the forceps baby, I'm pretty sure I know which picture he's talking about because it's a fairly famous image, one of the first images, or maybe the first image captured of the Grauballe Man. I don't know off the top of my head, but it's kind of him, and he's kind of like up like this, squeezed up. Of course, the bog, the peat has been squeezing him for like 1,000 years, right? And you can't tell, but his hair is like bright red now. It's brightish red, right? Kind of an unnatural color of hair, right? But that's because the original color of his hair was dark, right? But it's been changed by the color of the peat, right? And so we get this first kind of stanza as if he had been poured in tar, right? Poured into the tar, has become one with the tar. He lies on a pillow of turf and seems to weep the black river of himself. I love that because we get this image. He lies on a pillow of turf like he's sleeping, gently sleeping, but then seems to weep the black river of himself. Right? That black river of all of ourselves that pours out, that is both like this image of blood, but of this kind of congealed blood, but also of like the things inside of ourselves that nobody can know, right? Nobody else can know, right? Except for ourselves, are now being poured out, right? But do we get to see those things? Do we get to feel those things? Do we get to taste those things or smell those things, right? Maybe the people who originally dug him up, right, could smell those things. But for the poem, we're just stuck with this conduit, right, for the self, this black river that runs. Like, to me, a black river is almost this image of an underground river that moves underneath everything, right, without our awareness. I'm not going to go through line by line, but a few of the things that I really enjoy from the beginning. And enjoy is a weird word to talk about the description of a dead body, but that's really what this poem does for me, is that there's a lot of enjoyment here, right? Which enjoyment, Geoffrey Hill talks about this, another poet who I will probably be doing a poem by, talks about how enjoyment is possessive. Right, when you enjoy something, you take it away from itself in some ways, and you're saying, "This is mine, and I enjoy it for what it gives me." Right? There's this almost selfishness to enjoyment, but this is a poem about a dead body that has been pulled from the ground. Right? So I think enjoyment is a perfect word, right, for this kind of enjoyment, right, that I'm talking about. I'm enjoying the sounds that he's bringing forth. I'm enjoying the imagery, even if it's horrific imagery, right? This, his hips are the ridge and purse of a muscle, not muscle like, that we use to lift up things, but muscle as an M-U-S-S-E-L, right? Which goes along, which is a kind of rhyme, right? Thematic rhyme, muscle and his spine and eel. Right, this slippery thing, right, which is not the typical image of a spine that we have, right? But his spine has been changed by time, history, all of these things. And then we get to, why is he here, right? Ultimately, right? Did he just fall into the peat and was buried and found eventually? No, right? He was slit from ear to ear like this, and what people think is a ritual sacrifice. He seemed to be a fairly well put together person, right? Description of him talk about how his fingers were so well kept, right, preserved. That's the word I'm looking for, preserved, that they could get fingerprints off of it. Incredible, right? But that also speaks to the quality of his life, right? This guy probably didn't have rough hands. He probably didn't do a lot of manual labor. And there are some, people have printed all kinds of stuff about like why he might have been sacrificed. Some of the things that he's eaten may have been connected to it. That doesn't really matter to me. To me, right, and to the poem, I think the fact that he was sacrificed, that the people felt like they had to sacrifice him for whatever reason, or maybe he was also part of this sacrifice. Maybe he was a willing sacrifice, right? All of these things are kind of built into it. But either way, right, willing or unwilling, he was still sacrificed, right? His throat was still slashed. It was probably a fairly horrific ritual, but also special, right? But also meaningful, right? Meaningful because we found him, sure, right? But also meaningful for these people. To me, though, I think that probably an unwilling sacrifice, and I think that kind of goes into it. The cured wound opens inwards to a dark elderberry place. So we get the Black River and also this dark elderberry place, right? And then we proceed kind of into that dark elderberry place. There is a real turn here in the poem because the next is talking to the audience, right? Who will say corpse to his vivid cast? Who will say body to his opaque repose, right? Corpse and body don't seem to be words that fit this person, right? And when we think about ancient peoples, we put so much of ourselves onto it, right? In good and bad ways, and this poem does the same, right? It's talking about the violence that is going on around Heaney at the time in Northern Ireland, right? This is, not the beginning of the Troubles, right? Because that's a long, long history, right? But it's the Troubles. The capital T Troubles, right? This will be, kind of the burgeoning era of it, right? Late 60s, right, to the late 90s. I'm not trying to incite anything with the dates here, right? If I get some of the dates wrong, I'm just going off my memory, right? But it's a meaningful conflict to somebody like, Heaney, who was Irish and also from Northern Ireland, right? And I'm simplifying some of these things. Of course, there have been lots of debate around the political nature of this poem, but what I'm interested in here is really the imagery. A mat unlikely as a fetus's, right? So immediately after he says, who will say corpse, who will say body, he immediately compares the body to a fetus that has been delivered for us, right? The womb of the world, the womb of the peat has taken this corpse and has made it into something new, right? Which you can tell I'm smiling about this because there's this kind of ghoulish enjoyment, but also like, death is all of our fates, right? And the fact that we could be made new in death is really interesting to me. And I think really interesting to this poem. And bruised like a forceps baby. So once again, we get that baby imagery, and like when they're pulling him out of the earth, it's like the same way of pulling a baby with forceps, and sometimes it gets bruises on their shoulders and hips. And that's the way it kind of looks, he kind of looks bruised up in the other picture that I was talking about. In the pictures later, you can see him kind of laid out, and he still kind of looks like he's been smooshed almost into a childlike shape, right? Now he lies perfected in my memory, right? The speaker intrudes here, as he did before, saying, who will say corpse, right? Perfected in my memory, right? It's not the real body lying before us. It's the memory of the body. And what does that memory kind of hold on to? Well, the beauty and the atrocity, right? The actual weight of each hooded victim slashed and dumped, right? And we end with this image of slashing and dumping, right? Each hooded victim slashed and dumped, right? And then the next poem in the document is Punishment, which is another bog body, and it comes the Grauballe Man actually comes within Bone Dreams, Bog Queen, and then Punishment. His four kind of bog poems he has in this volume. He had a previous bog body poem called the Pauline Man, which is another famous bog body. In his previous book of poetry, which I believe came out in 1973. I think that was field work, but off the top of my head, right? So I love that poem for a lot of different reasons. I hope you loved it too. I hope you like my reading. Thank you for stopping by.